In my previous video, I used a picture of Luke's door to generate the layout, which I then transferred onto this piece of wood. So I lined up my cutout pieces back on this paper template, and I need to make some slight adjustments to this joint. So these line up quite nicely, and this joint is all flush. And before I go any further, I'm going to flatten one side on the jointer. And now cutting a slot into the end of each piece and making some splines to go into those slots. So I'm going to join these pieces with a piece of hardwood spline that I just cut out, and that will put them together, and I still get to use my straight table saw cut. And the reason I put the spline so far off center is when I cut the molding shape into this, I want this to be far enough down so that when I cut the shape, I'm not going to cut into the splines. Just glued and clamped this together. It was a little bit tricky because I had to clamp some pieces of scrap on there just to get a place to hook the clamp onto. If I'd had more foresight, I would have left a tab sticking out of these wooden parts when I cut them out on the bandsaw. So the next thing I did is to make that inside curve a nice smooth curve, because that's my reference surface, and then pass it through a thickness planer a few times to get it all down to the right thickness. So this is the existing molding that I need to match. Now you can get fancy router bits that cut a molding in one pass, like this one here for example, but I don't know anywhere where I can get a router bit that actually matches this molding. So I'm going to cut that as several passes using some smaller bits. So this little cove here I can cut with this bit, like so, or like so. This round over here I can cut with a round over bit, like so. And then this deeper cove here I can cut out with this bit. And then finally we have another convex round over, and I can use that same round over bit to approximate that. Now with most of my cuts at a 45-degree angle, I rigged up a temporary hookup for my dust extractor, so I just jury rigged this onto here, and that goes off to my dust extractor. Now to cut the molding on the curved workpiece, I'm going to need a curved fence, so I've glued together a few pieces of scrap, and where this arrow is, if I follow along here, even on the inside of the curves, the arrow is always going to be touching the wood. So that'll allow me to guide this piece around following the curves. So I'm going to start by cutting this bead on here, and I've got my original piece here and my round over bit lined up to cut that. And here's my round fence and the feather board on the other side, just to make sure that piece stays pressed on there. Well, the test pieces look okay, so let's try the real workpiece. So far so good. So now I've got a cove bit in here to cut this inside curve. It's not exact, but it matches it pretty close. Wow, this is starting to look surprisingly like molding. So finally setting up for cutting this last round over. Now unfortunately this bit doesn't match it very well. It's a bit too large or round. I've got another bit with a smaller round, but this one is smaller than in the original molding. So I'm going to cut it a little bit large, and that'll leave a slight corner that'll have to sand off there, but I think that'll make a pretty good match. And just a quick check. Yeah, it's good. Well, looking okay. Just need to do a little bit of sanding to clean all that stuff up. So now after a bit of sanding, it looks pretty decent. And here's the molding I made. And here's the original. It's fairly close. The bead here is a little bit larger. So I gave the trim to Luke and he installed it on his door. He said it fit just perfectly.